Hello and welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Richard Lowe. This is an interview that was done July or August of 2019. The worst thing you could ever do is interview a very high profile guest who has an amazing interview and then you just sit on it. You just hide it, which is what I did. I was fortunate enough to get a hold of the New York Times bestselling author, Dan Pink, and we had a great conversation. It was meant to be a bridge between season 4 of the podcast on patient communication and case presentation, and season 5 on leadership and motivating your team and working together. And somehow I took a break between seasons 4 and 5, and Matt and George started practice underwater, and one thing led to another, and all of a sudden here we are, almost more than 6 months later, and I still haven't released this interview. So I am so grateful that we were able to talk with Dan Pink. Amazing author, amazing thought leader, and I really think you're going to enjoy this episode. So the one thing I will say is, whenever you go back and listen to yourself, you notice things that you did wrong, especially on someone that's high profile like this. The thing that I absolutely did that wrong in this interview is I over prepared. I reread multiple of his books and was thinking about all of the ways that we could apply this to dentistry. And so listening back to this interview today, I realized I talked way too much. So I apologize in advance. If you are listening in this interview and you're like, Richard, shut up, just let Dan Pink talk. I apologize. I was trying to, bring the concepts of his book into dentistry. And I should have just let him share some more. So hopefully you can forgive me and still enjoy this. I certainly did. And here you go with Dan Pink. Okay, I have with us today Dan Pink, the New York Times best-selling author of multiple books, including Drive, To Sell Is Human, When, and then there's a couple more here that I haven't gotten to yet. I've read these other ones, but Free Agent Nation, The Adventures of Johnny Bunko, A Whole New Mind, that's one that's on my list that I need to get to. But I was sitting in a training about a month and a half, 2 months ago, from the Army. I'm a medical recruiter right now. Currently, I'm a full-time dentist, but they've got me in a medical recruiting position. And the full bird colonel in the Army, well, that's like an 06 rating. He was training all of these medical recruiters on the ABCs of attunement, buoyancy, clarity, of everything from your book. So First off, welcome to the show. Thank you for being on.
Thanks for having me on.
I love your work. I've been a big fan for a long time. Drive really impacted me when I listened to it a while ago. But these principles that you talk about in your book, and in all of your books, have specific application to dentistry. And I would love to hear your opinion and your thoughts on this. And let's start with To Sell Is Human. So for a long time, sales in dentistry was a real kind of like, ugh, even to this day, like it's hard for me to say sales and dentistry in the same sentence and feel good about that. So why shouldn't we feel icky about that?
Well, I mean, if you think, I think for two different reasons. Well, even one big reason is that what dentists do is what all of us do, which is that they have people whom they need to persuade, influence, convince, cajole. When we think about selling, when we think about that word selling, it means different things. Sometimes it means selling products or services, but it almost always means in any kind of job, getting people to do something that they might not want to do, getting people to do things in a different way, overcoming objections. And so all of us are selling all the time. And I think that in some ways the nature of dentistry is a huge portion of it is a persuasive act. Can you get your patient to abide by what the recommendations you're giving them? Can you get that patient to start flossing? Can you get that patient to take care of her teeth, in a more systematic way? Can you convince the patient that doing this procedure now is going to be less painful and less costly than waiting for the situation to deteriorate and dealing with it a year or 2 years from now? There's also persuasion in sort of putting people at ease and putting people, getting people to not look at coming to the dentist as a horrific chore. So
Yeah.
so I think there's a lot of persuasion. There's a lot of persuasion just built in there. I think for dentists more than anything else, and you see this in other forms of sales, is basically the most important thing is service. Are you providing a good service? Are you treating people well? Are you giving people value for your money, for their money? And generally, any kind of firm, any kind of enterprise that does that can be reasonably successful.
No, for sure. And I love the specifics in To Sell is Human of different ways that we can approach this. Because for a lot of people, like they didn't go into dentistry thinking, you know what, I'm going to have to convince people how to do something they don't want to do every day for the rest of my life. But that is the reality.
That's part of it. That's part of it. That's part of it. I mean, no one wakes up in the morning or goes to sleep at night saying, "Oh my gosh, this is such a great moment for me. I get to floss."
Right.
You know. So how do you? I mean, just using that as a very very mundane example, but that's a big part of it.
So talk to us about this. How, the ABCs, the always be closing is the traditional sales ABC, but you've built a new framework of influence and persuasion around ABC. So talk to us about what does this mean? Attunement, buoyancy, clarity.
Yeah. So if we take one step back here, what we know is that we know two things at a very 30,000 foot level. One is that in any kind of profession, including dentistry, we're persuading, convincing all the time. But we're also doing it on a remade landscape. And the remade landscape is really important. A lot of selling persuasion for an enormous amount of time, literally thousands upon thousands of years, was done in an environment of information asymmetry, where the seller always had more information than the buyer. The seller having more information than the buyer is why we have the principle encoded into our laws, encoded into our customs of buyer beware. Buyers have to beware because the sellers had an advantage. But something really remarkable has happened in the last 10 years or so, and that information parity, that information asymmetry that once defined the sales relationship is ending. And we're now at something closer to information parity. And so the question becomes, if you're persuading all the time and you're doing it in a landscape where you don't have an information advantage, how do you do that effectively? And how do you do that ethically? And this is really important in any profession. And just let me take one more beat on the information parity thing. It's true in dentistry. I can go online and I can describe. I can sort of. I'm trying to think. I haven't had any serious dental problems.
Okay, fair enough. So,
but let's say that I have. Oh my gosh, I have a pain in a particular tooth. All right. I can go online and do some amount of research. It might not always be good, but I can do some amount of research. I would not go to that dentist without having a little bit of information. And so the dentist's expertise is not merely having access to information. Okay, 30 years ago, I would have a very difficult time as a civilian accessing any kind of information about dentistry. Now it's relatively easy. And so the dentist's expertise comes not from having that privileged access to information, but in part from having the experience and from, hey, what do you got there? Okay, so this is nonsense, Dan. Don't pay attention to this. Yeah, that procedure, nobody does that anymore because it's been found that it's not very effective. And so the dentist is synthesizing information. The dentist is making sense of information. That's the C in the ABCs, which is clarity. Can you go from accessing information to curating information? So that's a big part of what a dentist does there. So anyway, so the question is, we're persuading all the time. We're doing it in a world of information parity. How do you do it effectively? Well, and if you go ahead. Yep.
I was going to jump in when you change that framework of caveat emptor, buyer beware, to caveat vendedor. I mean, Yelp, Google, all of these online reviews, every dentist has an experience of some patient just posting this big, long, awful review.
Yeah.
And fortunately enough of the time, it's a crazy patient. You can tell from the review, this is a crazy person versus someone that's making a rational review. But I think that changes the dynamic as well of, you can't oversell and overprescribe and pressure people into things, because that will come back to bite you as well. And
Yeah, right. Well,
unfortunately,
you should. Yeah.
no, unfortunately, that's happened in some of corporate dentistry and some other areas. You get a greedy dentist, you get a corporate office that's run by a practice manager who's trying to upsell and upcharge. Oh, really? This should be a crown versus a big filling and things like that. That I think that changes the dynamic of not only the best practices, but the pressure should always be that you're doing everything you can in the patient's best interest. It always should have been in the first place, but
Yeah.
the dynamic of the landscape has kind of forced that upon us, where if someone isn't doing something in the patient's best interest, people are going to find out about it online and they're going to post about it. And it's not a sustainable business model of taking care of patients.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's the other aspect of information parity, and you're basically helping the definition here. So about this transformation, we've gone from this world, and dentistry is a great example, where buyers had not much information, not many choices, and no way to talk back.
Right.
Okay? Not much information, not many choices, and no way to talk out. Now they have lots of information, lots of choices. And as you're suggesting here, through Yelp and whatever, all kinds of ways to talk back. Now, that's not an unalloyed good for the system or dentist, but they have ways to talk back. So the idea here is that in many cases, sellers of any kind used to be able to take the low road. Now the low road isn't sustainable, or it's less sustainable, and so you have to take the high road. Now, I think that good dentists always took the high road. I think good dentists always put the patient's interests first. I think it's the right thing to do. I also think, in the long run, at least, it's a better business, especially now. And so that is sort of this recasting of what it means to be a seller, what it means to be a persuader. And when we know this, we're persuading all the time. We're doing it on this remade landscape. If you look at the research across many, many fields, it turns out there are a set of personal qualities that seem to be most necessary in doing that effectively and ethically. And they are, as you suggest, the new ABCs. A, attunement; B, buoyancy; C, clarity. We talked about clarity. Clarity is, can you go from accessing information to curating it? A, attunement is, can you get out of your own head and see things from someone else's point of view? So if you have a patient who is resisting your suggestion, you can either kind of turn the dials and try to coerce the patient into doing something, or you can take a step back and say, okay, why is this patient reluctant? Why is this patient resisting? What can I do? How can I see things from that patient's perspective and find common ground? And that's an enormously important part of any profession, any persuasive act, including in dentistry. And it's an interesting. I never thought about it quite this way until talking to you. It's like, if you think about it, I go into the dentist typically, let's say twice. I go in twice a year. All right.
Sure.
So you have to think about, what's it like being in that office twice a year versus what's it like being in that office every single day, all day. Totally different. So some patients might be freaked out by the equipment or the
X-rays or anything,
whatever, the giant tentacled equipment staring at you, or the medieval
they know they're going to have to get numb,
or the medieval tools that are sitting on the tray, or why is this person wearing a mask? And so I think that kind of attunement is extremely important for dentists, and I do think that the best dentists understand that. I do think, again, maybe I'm being Pollyanna-ish, but I do think that in this field there is probably a close correlation between providing good service, taking good care of patients, and a sustainable business in the long run.
Absolutely. No,
in the short run, if you just want to have big numbers this month, upsell everybody on everything. Tell them they need every procedure, they need every crown, they need every special sealant, they need every teeth whitening, whatever. Just upsell, and you'll have a big month. But in the long run, you'll end up losing patients, and those patients will tell other patients. How do people? I don't know. Is there data on this? How do people find their dentist? Typically, how do people?
Sometimes it's Google search. The best ones is through word of mouth. Anytime that you've got a patient recommending to someone else, hey, go see this doctor. I love him. I would travel across town for him. That's the referral that you want too, because they come in with some pre-built trust. But going back to one of the things you said with attunement, I think a lot of times we lose perspective on the things that are important to patients, or how foreign all of this is to most people. Like, we
Yeah.
live in this world.
Yeah.
And so when someone brings up like, hey doc, I really just don't want x-rays, like, we kind of roll our eyes in terms of, okay, we've heard this before. A lot of times the reasons people don't want something aren't rational in our mind. And so we tend to blow people off rather than trying to sit in their point of view and sit in their perspective and connect with them somehow, and then move forward and share that information. But if we don't take that step of, hey, what does this feel like and look like from their perspective? So
Yeah.
is there anything in terms of attunement, is there any like questions we can ask ourselves? Is there any like exercises if this is something we're bad at? It's like, I like my point of view. I don't like taking other people's point of view. Help someone who's maybe not as good at this attunement. What would you recommend them?
There are all kinds of things you can do. So let's take that X-ray example. So if someone resists, and I can totally understand the instinct from the dentist point of view about, oh God, come on, it's like you're not going to get zapped with, beams that are going to prevent you from ever having children again. But I think that you're going to have. I think you need to take a step back and have a conversation. Why? Well, tell me why tell me. I understand where I've heard that before from other patients. Tell me why. And then it's just to have a conversation with that and take the point of view seriously, even if as a professional dealing with you're a professional who's thought your whole life about dental care. This is someone who's coming in twice a year, hasn't really thought much about it. In the moment they're a little bit nervous, you can allay those concerns. So have a conversation, take their point of view seriously. Another thing that you can do is that you can one of the ways, it's quite interesting. There's some really good research on mimicry. And one of the things, so mimicry seems like it's duplicitous, and there are certain sales training techniques that say, mirror the patient, mirror the customer prospects gestures and whatnot. And it turns out that's actually pretty good advice. And it's not duplicitous at all, because human beings are natural mimickers. And so pay attention to the person's gestures, pay attention and even reflect those back. But the most important thing that you can do in mimicry, in sort of a highly specialized realm as dentistry, is use the patient's language rather than your own specialized jargon. And so, because when we think of mimicry, we think of gestures, we think of facial expressions, we think of posture, and that's important. But language is a form of mimicry as well. And so what you have in any kind of expert field is non-experts using their terminology and experts crashing in and always using their terminology, and use it as a way. So if you use the patient's language rather than your own specialized language, or even better, use the patient's language to help them understand the specialized language, that's a really great form of attunement. Sometimes people don't feel like they're being listened to because they're speaking civilianese and the dentist is speaking dentistese, and so trust corrodes. People become uneasy. So that's another really important thing that dentists can do.
So just to summarize for people, so that first one, I love that question of, tell me why, tell me more about that. So that curiosity and asking more questions about whatever the patient's concerned about.
Yeah.
The mimicry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm just your hallelujah chorus nodding in agreement.
So the mimicry, and you're right, that feels a little weird. Like if a patient's real, you can just tell they sit in the chair real proper and kind of upright, and they're very much I don't want to say uptight, but someone who's very kind of carries them a certain way, and you come in and slouch and kind of you're laying back and being really casual. Maybe you're not going to connect with that person as much. Is that kind of what you're saying with the mimicry?
Could be. It could be. I could also read as you're not taking it seriously enough.
Sure.
Like like the person in the chair is taking it very seriously. Hey, it's my teeth, and you're coming into it with these giant implements. I'm a little nervous here. I'm a little like, this is a serious thing for me, and you're like, oh, and so that's another case where people might not feel always listened to. I think it's true, and even in what you call people, even in how you refer to people. Do you refer to your patients as Mr. X or Ms. Y, or do you refer to them as Steve or Maria? I think that I think that plays a role too.
There was a dentist who was lecturing the other month that I went to one of his courses, and he talks about how when he comes in and it's this little old lady, he practices in Texas. He said he kind of turns into a little old lady, like he kind of shrinks his shoulders down and forward, and he talks with them on their level. It's almost like unintentional, like he can't help it, but he wants to kind of let them know that, like, I'm coming to you where you're at. Um, and obviously it can be overboard. Obviously, people can pick up on that if you're being weird about being, mimicry. But as much as possible, it shows that you're paying attention to that person and you're not just like on your own wavelength and don't really care about them.
And what you're calling, I'll give you another adjective for that unintentional. I'll call it natural. I mean, that's what people do. Like, do you talk to a, I don't mean you, but I mean,
Sure.
I don't mean, you, Richard. I mean, do we human beings, do we, I don't, if I'm talking to a 3-year-old, I don't talk the same way that when I talk to a 33-year-old.
Right.
I mean, my physical stance is different. I mean, because if I'm 6 feet tall. If I talk to a 3-year-old, I'm going to be like, so you get down in their level. And so it just, human beings know how to do this. Human beings are natural mimickers. I don't think that you check your humanity at the door when you become a professional. I mean, I think that there's some times where you have to put aside certain kinds of things. You can't be overly empathetic and, say, oh, I just can't believe I'm causing this person any pain.
Sure.
I can't go forward. But I mean, I think you want to be, and I think that that's one of the things that comes out with these qualities of attunement and buoyancy and clarity, which is that they're things that human beings do. Human beings are better and more effective when they're attuned. They're kinder when they're more attuned, and we want people to be attuned to us. So why don't we attune ourselves to them?
So let's go to this next one then, because I love everything we've talked about with attunement. Let's talk about buoyancy.
Yeah.
Why is that so essential? And describe buoyancy for people who aren't familiar with your work.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, if you're persuading all the time, what it means, anybody who's persuading all the time is going to be rejected a lot. And we hate being rejected. We human beings hate being rejected. And so the buoyancy is, how do you stay afloat in that ocean of rejection? And there's some really good research that gives us the mechanisms to stay buoyant in the face of all that rejection.
Okay, so this manifests itself in dentistry as sometimes you just get the sense that, like, this patient probably isn't going to say yes to anything I need. So we kind of downplay their needs. We're like, yeah, okay, well, they need 3 crowns. They really do need 3 crowns, but we're just going to present one because I know they probably can't afford it and they seem kind of anxious. So I'm not going to tell them the urgency that I would with a more receptive, friendlier patient. So that, sometimes we kind of downplay their treatment plan or we watch things that we shouldn't. So buoyancy would be kind of the ability to share the bad news of, this is what you need, do it in a way that connects with them. And you've got the attunement, you've got the clarity, but that people are going to say no all the time, and that's okay.
Yeah.
And it's not you. So if someone just hates that feeling of rejection, how can they either bounce back from that or do it in a way, that allows the patient to say no without it being personal? What's the remedy to someone who struggles with rejection?
Yeah, there's some good research on this. It comes from some work done maybe 25 years ago by a guy named Martin Seligman at the University of Pennsylvania. And it has to do with what he and other researchers call people's explanatory style. How do you explain rejection? And as you suggest, for some of us, rejection is extremely painful, and we explain it in ways that are destructive. And so what you want to do is you want to change your explanatory style. And Seligman in his work talks about what he calls the 3 Ps, which are a way to, it's another term from another scholar, a way to decatastrophize rejection. So the 3 Ps are personal, pervasive, and permanent. Personal, pervasive, and permanent. Okay. So as you said, you already picked up on one of them. A lot of times when we get rejected, we say, oh, it's all my fault. All right, I'm taking it personally. This person doesn't like me. This person doesn't respect me. And you have to, sort of you have to challenge that and ask yourself, is this entirely personal? And chances are, especially in your field, it's not entirely personal. It could be like the person is scared. The person doesn't, as you suggested before, the person doesn't have enough money to cover all the treatments. The person isn't ready yet. Might have nothing to do with you. The pervasive is our feeling that when we get rejected, this always happens. And so you have to actually rebut that into yourself and say, does it always happen? What about today? Have you convinced any patients to do anything today or this week? And you rebut that. And then personal is really the catastrophizing aspect. I'm sorry, permanent is the catastrophizing aspect of it, because we like to say, it's terrible, it's going to ruin everything. Most things don't ruin everything. And so you just have to ask yourself, in the face of rejection that feels bad, is it personal? Probably not entirely personal. Is it pervasive? Probably not. Is it permanent? Probably not. And go on. And there's some really good research showing that when people change their explanatory style, they actually fare better in the face of rejection. They do better in other aspects of their work.
That's fantastic. And that's having a specific way that you can kind of deconstruct, because you walk out of the room and, you present treatment and a patient says, no, thanks, I'm not interested, blah, blah, blah. And there is a strong tendency to really internalize that. So if you have these 3 P's, you can depersonalize it. You can, look at the permanence. And then what was the third P?
Personal, pervasive, and permanent.
Pervasive. So that one was, so I'm just trying to re-summarize.
So here's a way to think about it. When we get rejected, we say, it's all my fault. It always happens and it's going to ruin everything. All right. It's all my fault. It always happens and it's going to ruin everything. All right. Is it all your fault? Is it entirely personal? Probably not. All right. Does it always happen? Probably not. It's probably not pervasive. Is it going to ruin everything? That is it permanent? Probably not. And just going through those 3 Ps is really helpful. And this is true. This is true outside of your profession as well. I mean, the Seligman's technique, he derived it, believe it or not, from a study of life insurance salesmen. They happened to be all men, in Pennsylvania this might even be longer than 20 years ago, I can't remember. And he found the most successful life insurance salesmen it had nothing to do with their personal training, their training or their expertise. It had to do much more to do with their explanatory style. And this has since been used in a variety of other realms, even kind of quasi-therapeutic realms of, when people are, to some extent, it's a close cousin. It's sort of related to what's called cognitive behavior therapy, which is a foundational technique in helping people reframe, recontextualize bad things that happen to them. Exactly. Yeah.
So, okay, well, this has been, and I don't want to miss out on some of your other work that we could apply to helping us as leaders. This has been extremely useful for a dentist who's, struggling to present treatment, struggling to be persuasive, not take it personally. I highly recommend, and we'll have links in the show notes to your book, To Sell Is Human. Let's shift gears now and look at Drive. Let's look at this idea of a lot of dentists will set up a bonus system. They'll set up some way in their office. They're like, man, I just wish my team members would take ownership like I do of the success of our practice, of the success of our patients' treatment plans, all of these things. And so in order to try and motivate them, they say, let's set up a bonus structure where if you do X, then you get Y. And maybe for a little while it works, but then eventually it starts to backfire, or people start to expect those things. And now they're in a situation where they've got this bonus system that has backfired on them. Why would this happen? Why is this a problem? And do you see this happening often in other fields as well?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of, again, that book is built on some big body of research in social science that shows that those kinds of motivators that you're describing, which you could call, if-then motivators, if you do this, then you get that. What those show is that they work pretty well for simple tasks and short time horizons. They work significantly less well for more complex tasks and longer time horizons. And as you also suggest, they can really, really distort behavior in certain circumstances. So I think that in most dental practices, they're probably not a great idea. Yeah. There are other kinds of things that one could, like I don't think that you should give people bounties for getting patients to agree to extra procedures or extra
No,
treatment and things like that.
there's things that are like preventive, like fluoride. Fluoride is one of those things that the research behind it is very strong. There's a very
Uh-huh.
good evidence base that if you do this
Yeah.
prophylactically, it does prevent cavities and it does prevent things from happening. But your hygienist has to present it, and sometimes the patients say no, and sometimes they say yes.
On
So
that
there,
one, I think what you should do is change the default. So basically, you say to the patient, in our practice, we typically give all of our patients fluoride treatment because it has these effects and da 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 da, and it's good practice. Um, so we typically do that. However, you're welcome to opt out if you want.
sure.
Like not make it make the choice to decline it rather than the choice to accept it.
Okay. So this is the
That's
next step in the
because
procedure.
I mean I think it's a separate somewhat related point. But basically, if you believe as a professional that your patients need fluoride, then I would tell them that and make that the default choice. But of course, allow them the discretion to opt out of it if they want.
Sure. No,
rather than
absolutely.
have them make the choice to either take it or not. To say the default choice is this, and you can opt out if you want, but we recommend that you don't because it's good for you and it's going to save you money in the long run.
Absolutely. No, I think that makes a ton of sense. And I think also if you can frame that to your team and really get your hygienist to take that mentality of this is the default, this is just what we do,
Yeah,
then
yeah.
it's no longer this like thing of like, oh, now I got to tell the patients about fluoride. It's more
Listen,
of like,
listen. The other thing is that do how many decisions do you want your patients making when they're in the chair? What you. I don't know if you always want to have them making certain decisions about. I think in certain cases you do, but in other cases you don't. And so fluoride just is the default. That's the default. They can opt out.
sure. Okay, that's a great example there of how to reframe that. So another one is like a lot of times, we're not talking about upselling patients. We're talking about keeping your team engaged throughout the day. So if something falls through, rather than the team being like, oh, perfect, now I can check my phone for 15 minutes, or
Mm-hmm.
they're looking for ways to slack. The thought is let's do a bonus system that if overall our office does hit certain numbers or certain benchmarks, then we have a team bonus. And that's going to keep them engaged. That's going to keep them filling in cancellations. So if a patient cancels, they're calling other people, or if something opens up on the schedule, they're excited to do one extra procedure. It's like, hey, rather than doing your 5 cavities over 5 appointments, we can do 3 of them today. And then you can spend less time in the chair. And you look across and you see your assistant rolling their eyes because they're like, oh, I just want to, wrap up and move on. So, trying to get your team to take on that mentality of let's serve our patients as much as possible today rather than I just want an easy day today. So, and
Yeah.
that's where I think some of those bonus systems come into play, but they end up losing their effectiveness or they're really tricky to get right. And so many times they backfire. So, how do we help our team feel motivated where they take ownership of their job, where they take ownership of helping the patients out, of improving systems in our practice? And obviously they're not owners. They don't own the dental practice. And so for them, it is a job. So how do we help transform that and lead in a better way?
Yeah, it's tough to do, but I think a lot of it has to do with I think the first step is who you let in the door in the first place
Sure.
to work there. A lot of times, what we in a lot of businesses we have this false belief that basically we're going to set up this system and anybody we can basically plug anybody into the system that we have and they're going to perform as we expect, and that's not true.
It's not
What you
McDonald's.
No, it's not. And you want to have so it's really who do you to me a lot of it goes fundamentally to hiring. Where do you source your people? How do you find your people? How do you train your people? What expectations do they have coming in, et cetera, et cetera. So the first step is letting in great people. The second step is there's an important part of compensation. The most important part of compensation is fairness. And so you got to pay people fairly. And if people feel like they're not being paid fairly, they're not going to be motivated. And so you should try to pay people as well and as fairly as you possibly can. And people will evaluate their fairness based on, if someone doing a similar job here with the same level of experience getting paid more than me, significantly more than me, that's not fair. If there are other dental practices in whatever market you're in and they're paying their dental assistants much more, that's not fair. So you want to pay people fairly, and you don't want people thinking about the money. You want people thinking about the patient, and so that compensation matters a lot. So beyond that, there are various things you can do. First of all, this is self-evident. Every leader, every parent knows this. You model the behavior that you want. So if you're acting like a jerk, or if you're acting like a money grubber, or if you're acting like you disdain patients, that's going to seep way into anybody working there. So you model the behavior that you want. The other thing is that there's some good research out there about what else we can do. First of all, certain kinds of things that people do in that kind of role end up getting a little bit repetitive, a little bit routine.
Sure.
And so what you want to do is you want to give people as much autonomy as they can with that the system will allow into, over their work. But more important, you want people to help get people better at their jobs. You want to have them see a sense of progress. How are they making progress? And so, I think that a lot of dental assistants would be amazed to see a catalog. Okay, here's how many patients you treated in the last month, and they would be, whoa, wait a second. So you actually had an effect on 47 lives this month. 47 people this week are better off because of their encounter with you. And that sense of purpose is actually that sense of purpose is a big, big motivator. When people see, so it helps. Am I making progress? Am I having an impact on the world? Can be really motivating. But that has to be something that kind of courses through the culture rather than is, a program or a procedure.
Right. Well, and I think a great example of this in dentistry is continuing education. So a lot of times dentists, they want to learn more. Let's say,
Yeah.
they want to do some sleep apnea treatment. There's ways that
Yeah.
you can treat sleep apnea through dental appliances.
Right.
And if the dentist just goes to the course by themselves and they learn everything, and then they come back to their team and they tell them, okay, we're going to do this, that, and the other, that doesn't often go well. And the hard part is, it's expensive to pay people, fly people, put them in a hotel, pay for their registration, in order that you can all do this new procedure together. But if you also look at it as, not only are we doing this new procedure, we're investing in ourselves, but this is going to make their everyday job more motivating
Yeah.
for the future. So now this assistant is like, okay, not only are we treating teeth, we're also helping save lives through treating sleep apnea. And I have competence in this that the average dental assistant doesn't. I have a knowledge base in this. And they feel that, my doctor cared enough to invest in me and to bring us out and to trust me that I would step up to the plate. If you see that as, this is not just a one-time expense benefit, this is an ongoing way that we're going to work together as a team and motivate my team, I think it makes it a lot easier to swallow the $5,000-10,000+ that it takes to fly a team out and take an event like this, and invest in their future.
Sure. I agree. I agree completely. And let me just get back to this idea of just bonuses per se. I'm not against team-based bonuses. So let's say that the practice at the end of the year has a great year. Profit sharing, whatever sort of bonus based on usually dental offices, I mean, except the ones that are like very sort of like consolidated and corporate run, but something like my dentist and her office up here, is relatively small number of people. Hey, if you had a great year, everybody in that office helped contribute to, so everybody in that office deserves a piece of it. And so I have no problem with that. I mean, I do think that there are limits to, are people going to fill in that missing, that canceled appointment. I don't think that bonuses will get you there. I think basically that the culture will get you there. If people feel like they're doing something important, if it's expected if that's the norm, if it's established as a social norm, And basically people say that's how we do things around here because it's the right thing to do.
No,
And
that's awesome.
that's very hard to do. It's very hard to do. Most organizations don't get this right. Whether they're cleaning teeth and filling cavities, or whether they're building roads, or whether they're doing management consultancies. I mean, most organizations don't get this right.
Well, and I think most dentists struggle with this issue, and the default sometimes is to think the only way to solve this problem is throwing more money at it. The only
Right.
way to motivate my people is to pay them more or put some bonus system in place. And it can be done correctly. As you said, it can be done in a profit sharing, fair, exciting way.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the more tools that a dentist has at their disposal to shape a culture, to give, you mentioned autonomy. One of the things I was thinking about is, if there's a problem in the practice, if the solution to that problem is always top down, of the dentist coming in and saying, okay, I went out and did a bunch of research, this is what we're going to do, okay, here's how we're going to implement it, versus here's the problem I'm seeing, what do you guys think?
Bingo.
What have you seen work? Because they can't work from home. You talk about autonomy, there's a lot of other ways that people can have autonomy and control. There is patience, there is a schedule, but giving them that sense of control over their workspace and input could be a lot more motivating than I think we realize.
Absolutely. That question that you asked is a great question. I mean, we don't ask that question enough in any realm, which is, what do you think?
No, absolutely.
And you start asking people, some people don't think anything, but you start asking that question, a few more people will start thinking, and there are plenty of people out there who have better ideas than you, and so go get them by asking them what they think.
No, for sure. Well, if you have just a few more minutes, we could dive into When, because I've been binge listening to When over this last week, and I'm impressed as well that you've at least When. I can't remember if you read the other ones, but authors reading their own audiobooks doesn't always go well, and I've really enjoyed your pacing and you reading the audiobooks.
Thanks. I don't let anybody else read my audiobooks.
I enjoy that, and I think
because I don't think they know how to read it properly. I'm wrong, but I don't. But that's my distorted point of view.
No, stick to it. No, it's been great. So a lot of dentists will come in, and I've heard some dentists even say, like, I don't want to have time to have a pee break. Like, I just want to be rushing around all day long from 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. or even some of these offices are doing like 12-hour shifts.
Yeah.
Some will power right through lunch. And their schedule isn't really built on purpose. It's like whichever time the patient could get in, that's when we see them.
Right.
If it's an easy procedure, if it's a difficult procedure.
Right.
What are some of the problems with this? If we just kind of come in and assume that any hour in the day for a dental procedure is the same as any other hour, I'm trying to lead into this book that I've been reading without kind of stealing your thunder.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the mistaken premise embedded in that is that it presumes that our cognitive abilities, our brain power, remains static across the day, and that's just fundamentally not true. Our brain power changes over the course of the day. It changes in material ways, and so not all times of the day are not created equal. So we perform differently on different tasks at different times of day. So that becomes a huge issue. So if I knew that if I had a choice as a patient between a dentist who never took a break and a dentist who regularly took breaks, I would take the dentist who regularly took breaks, because I think that dentist is going to be better. I think the evidence is overwhelming that the dentist who takes those occasional breaks is going to do better than the one who powers through. So I would not go to any serious medical procedure, including any serious dental procedure, in the afternoon. I would go to a routine teeth cleaning in the afternoon, no question about it. But when our younger daughter, about 2 years ago, had her wisdom teeth taken out, so it's quasi, not quite dental, but dental.
Oh yeah. No, that is dental. I mean, we're taking out teeth, we're doing surgeries. Sometimes the oral surgeon does it. Sometimes the general dentist does it.
So she, for this procedure, had to have general anesthesia. The evidence is there's no way any kid of mine is having general anesthesia in the afternoon, because we know that across a range of fields that anesthesia errors are far more likely in afternoon appointments than in morning appointments. And so on those kinds of things. So when you talk about like the most challenging, like I think most dentists should do the most challenging procedures first, and get those done, because we know that for most people, not every single person, but for most people, the mornings are when we're most vigilant. We're able to bat away distractions. So for work that requires that intense concentration, those kinds of that time of day tends to be better for most people, particularly for tasks requiring that kind of vigilance. So and then also on breaks. I mean, one of the things we know about breaks is that breaks are part of our performance. They're not a deviation from our performance. And this is something I got wrong before I did the research for this book. But I had always thought that amateurs took breaks and professionals didn't take breaks, and It's totally the opposite. Professionals take breaks.
And that's hard to internalize, especially when, we've got like Gary Vaynerchuk and all these people in the culture today who are saying like, sorry, I don't mean to call him out, but I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
But like, more is more, and you always got to be pushing yourself and hustling and to relax or to take a breather is viewed as a sign of weakness. And I love that you include in your book so many examples of medical errors, of colonoscopies and missed polyps and all of these things. And for us in general dentistry is very relatable in terms of, the tooth where, you get every little speck of decay out versus, did you check that extra time and make sure you got everything out?
Yeah, so absolutely. And the people who are advocating, always hustling and never taking breaks haven't looked at the research. I mean, that might seem intuitively appealing, and it's certainly it's an alluring point of view. Sure. It just happens to be empirically false. It's fundamentally not true. And if you look at just about truly every kind of human endeavor, athletes, musicians, surgeons, taking breaks improves performance. Now, what we're not talking about that every dental office should have a 3-hour siesta each afternoon.
Sure.
What we're talking about is a professional in a demanding job taking 15 minutes in an afternoon to take a walk outside for 15 minutes without her phone, to renew her mental energy, to renew her physical energy,
focus,
and regain her focus. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There's and the other thing we can do in those kinds of settings to mitigate some of the problems, though, is many dental offices have this, and certainly many hospitals have this, is the use of timeouts. So let's say you're doing a procedure. Let's have a timeout before we start doing it. Let's make sure everybody's on the same page, that we know what we're doing, that we have all the equipment that we need, and also some form of checklist. Checklists are for complicated things are enormously effective, and so the combination of so again, if I don't want to be seeing a dentist for a complicated procedure after she's been working 11 hours straight without a break.
Sure. No, and I love, you have in your book, you break down specifics, ways to take more efficient breaks.
Yeah.
And we won't go into that right now. People should go get the book. It's a phenomenal book. But I will say, when you said timeouts, I started to smile because the Army. So I'm an Army dentist who's done Army dentistry up till about 6 months ago when I started doing medical recruiting. And the Army is dead serious about timeouts for their hospitals, but now within their dentistry system, to the point where a lot of dentists hate it. Because we have this massive checklist. We have to mark the tooth. We have to say it out loud and like point to it and look at our assistant and check in for something that a lot of times feels very routine. It's like, okay, this tooth needs a filling. However, people fill the wrong tooth. I personally, as a child, as a teenager, had a dentist who worked on the wrong premolar. You've got 2 premolars right next to each other. You got 2 to 3 molars, depending if you have wisdom teeth or not. They all start to look alike. You see a lot of patients and you start drilling on the wrong tooth. And it can happen to the best of us. And so the Army just in this last 24 months has like escalated over and over to now where we have a full page checklist called the Universal Protocol Timeout, and it feels like overkill to a lot of people, but it did reduce our errors, and it reduced the times where you something wrong happens. You make a mistake, and sometimes it's reversible. Like if you were supposed to be working on the bottom left and you get the bottom right numb, but then you catch it and you realize it. So that's reversible, or something irreversible, like taking out the wrong tooth or working on the wrong tooth. And unfortunately, those things have happened. So as resistant as people might be, because everyone thinks they're better than average, everyone thinks they're not going to be the one that does that, but it happens to everyone. It's just a matter of time. And so the more you can build into your routine these checklists, these timeouts, these breaks, the more at your A game, and the more you're going to catch yourself before you do something stupid that you regret.
I'd like to ask those dentists if they have, now in Army dentistry, there's less of patient choice about where you go, obviously. But yeah. but I would like those dentists who are resisting the checklists, I'd like to know about their own behavior. Do they want to go or have their loved ones go to a complicated dental procedure with a dentist using a checklist or a dentist not using a checklist? And my guess is that they would go with the dentist using the checklist rather than the dentist relying entirely on his intuition and good instincts. So I think the choices they would make for themselves and their own family are different from the choices they're making as professionals for those patients, which is why we have checklists in the first place. Now, that said, it's not like any kind of checklist is permanent. I mean, obviously, and your listeners know that it's not like any kind of checklist is permanent. This is the checklist from now until whatever. The point about checklists is that we can refine them over time. We can figure out, are there steps that we can bypass? Are there extra steps that we need? Are there ways to refine things? It's an organic document, but just bring those dentists on who are resisting checklists and ask what they would want if one of their kids was under anesthesia for a complicated dental procedure.
No, and absolutely. And I think I've loved sitting in the Army oral surgeons that I've worked with and I've taken out wisdom teeth with, and it feels right. This is the right thing to be doing, exactly as you describe it in your book, where everyone is accounting for what's going on, everyone agrees, everyone is on the same page. And I think it brings a level of seriousness to what we're doing as well, that even though this isn't life or death, you want every procedure, you want to go perfectly. And if you're just kind of assuming, we're always going to do it the right way, it doesn't have to be a big, long, complicated checklist.
Exactly. I have some empathy for that, because you don't want bureaucracy to creep in so that every checklist is multiple pages long, full of extraneous steps.
And the Army has a way of doing that where, they want to account for every circumstance. Right. And so to then and once they add more checklists, they don't typically go back to less checklists.
Right.
So, and that's where some of the resistance is, I think if people had a little bit more control of okay, you need to have a checklist that hits these core things. But you can kind of customize it and make it work for your team and your workflow. But the principle is the right thing to do 100% of the time.
Yeah.
And just owning that and making sure that you're taking the best care of patients is the right thing to do. So this has been a blast. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. I'm always happy to talk about dentistry.
So this will be like the plug zone. This is the chance for you to talk about, where can people find more about you and your work, and how to get a hold of the great things that you've done.
Well, just go to my website, which is www.danpink.com. I've got all kinds of resources there, information about the books, as well as a bi-weekly email newsletter. That's all kinds of good stuff.
Cool. Thank you again, Dan. This was great.
Right.
This was
my pleasure.
Take care.
Thanks for having me. Okay. So long.
Okay. Once again, that interview, I am so grateful that we got Dan on the show. I love his books. Highly recommend. If you haven't read Drive, if you haven't read When, if you haven't read To Sell Is Human, or any of his other books, go out there and get your hands on some of his books. They are amazing. Go to danpink.com. Just an incredible author. So grateful to have him on the show. And once again, I apologize for talking way too much on that interview. Next time we have someone that is an author that is as accomplished as Dan Pink, I'll try and shut up some more. So I thoroughly enjoyed that. A little bit out of context for COVID, but at the same time, no, the principles for uh, persuading or convincing or talking with someone still apply. And whether that's, talking to your team about your plans and reopening your office, or that's talking with patients, accepting treatment, moving forward with things that are needed, we're always going to have these skills and be honing these skills of convincing others to do things that are in their own best interest. And then all of the stuff with drive and leadership and motivating people and building autonomy into your team, empowering your team so that there's a purpose and a cause. I feel like I would have better questions now about all of the things that have come up in this season. But once again, thank you guys for listening to the show. We absolutely appreciate you listening to the Shared Practices podcast. We know there's a lot of other podcasts out there. Hopefully you're healthy. Hopefully you're well. And we'll talk with you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.